Good afternoon, Warriors. Back with another episode of Vigor Warriors 2 and the 1% Club. Hope we are doing well. Hope you guys are on your purpose. Hope you guys are continuing to have conquest and conquest yourself out there. Also, wonderful comments we're having. In fact, the reason I'm doing a second one here, great comment from my man, Dwayne. Shout out to you, Dwayne. I think he, and this kind of goes into the topic we had just previously, plus this topic we're going to talk about today. Before we do that, go ahead and like, comment. Please go ahead and subscribe. All those things are helpful, help me a great deal in getting information and things like that. So, Dwayne had an interesting question. He said, did you release? And so he's asking me because my voice must have sounded differently in the last one, in which I was speaking a lot quicker and a little more not as comfortable. And I think we have a lot of viewers very perceptive. I think that's a great comment, Dwayne. Obviously, did not release physically. However, I would say this, that I probably should not have, I wanted to do the video to get it out of the way because I wanted to cover that topic. However, I probably should have waited, because I had some interactions earlier in the morning that were negative in some ways, and I got mad and pissed off at somebody, and I exuded some of that energy. And so, as Dwayne is pointing out, you could see a difference in the person when they're not on retention or they're losing energy. And I think in this case, you could obviously see that I wasn't the same person. So that kind of shows you right there that emotions, first of all, can make a big difference in your whole attitude, but not only that, but affects semen retention. And so the second thing, obviously, then is that you can kind of tell the difference between the two. So I want to appreciate Dwayne a lot for this, to kind of indicate to us that you can tell a difference. Substantially, it makes a difference when you're on retention. And we're not just talking about physical retention. I always talk about the energy suckers and the vampire suckers and the zombies. Well, it's not only physical, my friends. You can be drained out from an emotional standpoint, or if you got upset, which I tend to do once in a while. I still admit that the warrior gets upset because I have a lot of passion, and sometimes that kind of ends up being a negative, and so I end up kind of feeling that, and so I let it out. And I sometimes regret that I do that at times, but I feel that that's what happens. And so I'm still working on my own issues, Warriors, just like you guys are. And so this is an issue of mine. So I appreciate Dwayne a lot for bringing that up, because it's a good point. Once you're able to understand how the emotions work and how that you can actually go ahead and lose energy emotionally, I think that's a good point. Because he mentioned that when he end up releasing, all of a sudden you start getting a little more anxious. You get a little more nervous, anxiety. We've talked about this in a previous video. But you get a lot more nervous and anxiety, and so what ends up happening is that you rush more in your speaking. So it's a good sign that you can tell how things are better when you're not releasing energy. Now, it doesn't matter if it's physical or emotional. I think certainly you can be drained out emotionally too. In my case, that's what happened this morning, because I had a lot of stress. A lot of people I was dealing with that I thought were doing things not correctly in my book. And so the warrior had to kind of come down hard, but it had an effect on the warrior too. And so Vigor Warriors 2 was really stressed out. So thank you, Dwayne, for bringing this up. I really appreciate that. Now, this goes into our topic for today, which many of you have talked about, but I kind of want to bring it to the surface a little bit. Let's talk about life philosophy a little bit, Stoicism, and semen retention. So the person who is the nomad, the person who's by themselves, really is a person who is cultivating themselves, becoming the best person they become. And we see this a lot with the MGTOW movement now, where men are deciding to be on their own and be happy living by themselves. You can live a life like that. Even though I'm married for 30 some years and have 3 wonderful kids and a wonderful wife, I'm very happy by myself. I've always been like that, and I got married in my 30s, I think right before 30, and as we approached 31 years in marriage, I was happy by myself. Doesn't mean that I didn't need to be with people and different types of things like that, but I could live with myself, and that's what makes, I think, living with other people better, because you're able to do that. You're able to kind of live your own life. And I believe that life philosophy is really important. Obviously, when it comes to semen retention, that's one aspect of your life philosophy. And if you're able to consume that in your mind and be able to understand that as you're on your journey, you're able to kind of indicate things that are important, you'll realize a lot of things that we do in this so-called world of matrix, I call it, are not that really important. And some of you young guys, you're still going to experience a lot of these things. But as you get older, in my case, and being 61, I realized a lot of the things that I had that were just temporary material types of things, whether it's money, whether it's cars, whether it's people. Before I got married, all these type of things were all things that kind of hopefully would make me happy, but in the long run didn't make me happy. What made me happy more is the feeling I have now of peace and joy, because those things are not that important. Unbelievably, because they're not that important, they come more in abundance than they did before, and that's a whole nother topic we could talk about when it comes to money. And by the way, we had a comment, and I'll have to go back and look at this, but very astute comments about compound interest and being a sin. I'll have to look at that, because I think it's a very good comment. So shout out to people who've been talking about that a little bit. So we talk about the lifestyle. It's a life philosophy that you're taking to basically be that warrior. Now, if you think about the warriors, and you think about warriors in the old days, and whether it was the Romans, whether you're talking about the Vikings, whoever you're talking about people who lived independently. You talk about people who did their own thing. They didn't care about the laws, the rules. They did their own thing. And I think that kind of mentality has to be with a person. Now, it doesn't mean you have to go break all the laws and do things like that. But you have to be at a point in which you're basically saying, this is my life, and I'm going to live it the way I want to live it. And you need to do a lot of research, not only to understand yourself, but to understand the life around you and the people around you. A lot of examples I could give you, even yesterday, watching with a number of people a football game and just looking at their value system and ideas of things that are not that important any longer to me. They're obviously important to a lot of the people younger in my relatives and families and things like that, but they're not really that important in the long run. And I think what happens as the years go by, you realize your wants and even your needs become a lot less, and that's when you become a lot more abundant as well. And I think that's why Napoleon Hill basically kind of talked about in his book Think and Grow Rich, that men especially become a lot more wealthier in their 40s or 60s because of that very reason. They transmute that energy into a positive type of result, and they don't need as much, because they have a lot of things, and so their wants, are a lot smaller, their needs are a lot smaller. And as a result of that, you end up then having a lot more time for things that you want to do. Also, you have a lot more time to practice on yourself. If you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you'll see that the top levels really talk about self-actualization, self-esteem. Those are things, after you get the material things, that you're able to have more of. And as a result of that, you're then able to say, okay, I'm becoming more fulfilled as a person. And that's when we talk about this whole idea of Stoicism. We talk about semen retention. You're basically living a life that you want to live. And you realize you don't need people. And a warrior realizes they don't need things. And it's nice to have those things and people. but it's a whole different mentality. See, warriors, there are people out there who they can't live without people. There's people out there that can't live without things. And when you have a combination of both of those things, that person becomes a slave to those people and things. And you see it all the time. I don't care how old they are, they have not gotten to the point where the needs outweigh the wants. And the problem is that people get into that mentality, they become slaves to those other people and those other things. Now, what are we talking about? Well, let's look at a couple examples here. Let's look at how a person can become a slave. We're talking about drinking. If they can't stop drinking, who controls who? The warrior's not in control. The drinking is in control. Gambling, the same way. You can't stop it. I see it over the weekend, and lots of people who gamble, gambling money on on the game and left and right different things, right? If you can't control those type of things, then you're in a whole different type of situation, and you become a slave to that. Obviously, sex is a big one. You can't control that, and you can't use semen retention to control that. You're going to be a slave to that idea as well. And so when you look at all this, you're talking about becoming a slave. And then when you're also talking about the fact that you are now being a slave to people, obviously if you can't live without a person, or that person becomes someone you have to have, and you're desperate for that person, now you become a slave to that person. And we see this all the time in many types of forms of life and many times of situations, and that's where you don't want to be. A warrior has to develop themselves first. And the reason we talk about a lot of this, guys, is the fact that you have to be strong as a person yourself. Once you have that strength, now you can control other things around you, because you're not dependent on being someone who is dependent on other people. That's the last thing you want to be as a warrior. You want to have the ability to be able to do things on your own. Provide for yourself if you have to. Be able to protect yourself if you have to. This is why we talk about getting in shape. We talk about somebody, I don't care how old you are, getting in shape, cultivating your mind the best you can be, being the best person possible, so you're able to cultivate your own self. And therefore, you're not dependent on any other person. You're not dependent on the government of any country. You're not dependent on other people. You're dependent on you. You're the person who is the person taking charge. And this, in my mind, is what life should be about. So therefore, we talk about Stoicism. We talk about a life philosophy. I think that is a great philosophy. And I've always supported that idea that people need to be independent nomads, I call them, warriors running around and basically living in their own life. And now they have nothing to be ashamed about, and they're working obviously with God, who gives them that type of attitude and instills in them the attitude of being creative and being strong and being someone who's independent. And I think that's what a lot of women want in their men. They want a leader. Now, they'll strive to, be part of that. And that's your choice to allow them to be part of that. But the bottom line is that they're going to admire someone who's strong. They're going to want to be with that person because they want that strength. It's that energy rubbing off on them. And you see that. So anyway, great topic for a lot of you guys to talk about. Once again, as we look at this, I think it's important to understand that as we look at this life philosophy, you have to do the things that you feel are right. And you cannot you can listen to other people and make adjustments, but in the long run, you're the person that is in charge of things, and it's important to realize that. All right, my friends, enough for today. 2 things to remember. First one, as we know, every day is a great day to a new warrior and a great warrior. And the second thing, my friend, continue to better!